The American Civil War is often remembered for its iconic leaders, intense battles, and larger-than-life figures. But what about the everyday people who lived through the conflict? The stories of soldiers, civilians, and families caught in the crossfire of this national tragedy are just as compelling. From young children forced to grow up too quickly to farmers who risked everything for their beliefs, these ordinary individuals had extraordinary experiences. In this video, we delve into the untold stories of 10 such people whose lives were irrevocably shaped by the war. You won't believe the courage, resilience, and heartache that they faced. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more fascinating stories from the American Old West and beyond. Mama told me not to come. During the Civil War, some of the men who enlisted were actually just young boys, not yet in their late teens. For example, in March 8, 1862, twins John and William Moore, both 16 years old, joined the Confederate Army in Richmond, Virginia. As their regiment prepared for the Second Battle of Manassas, it was ordered to merge with the Army of Virginia. However, both the boys' mother, Maria Moore, and their family doctor expressed serious concerns about their ability to serve. The doctor wrote a letter to the regiment's surgeon, emphasizing that the twins were frail and in poor health. He argued, "I have been the family physician for Mrs. Moore Sr. for 8 years, and I am convinced they are unfit for active duty." Despite these medical concerns, the twins were allowed to enlist. However, by October 1862, they were discharged due to their age, not their health issues. A couple of years later, at 18, William rejoined the Confederate Army, no longer restricted by his mother's legal authority. He went on to prove himself as a capable soldier, earning a promotion to captain in the 15th Virginia Infantry Company. Unfortunately, during the Battle of Petersburg, William was captured. Just 3 days later, he was released after taking an oath of allegiance to the United States, marking a turning point in his life. The story of George Wingate Weeks, on the other hand, did not unfold as favorably. At only 14, George enlisted in the Union Army in October 1862, claiming to be 16, which was the minimum age for enlistment. His mother, Abigail Weeks, wrote a letter to the regiment's chaplain requesting her son's discharge upon learning he had lied about his age, but the request was refused. As a drummer boy for the 8th Maine Infantry, George endured the hardships of war. In July 1864, he was injured in the foot at the Battle of Petersburg. Despite the difficult conditions and the poor quality of food, George continued his service, writing to his mother about the unbearable rations. "We get wormy hardtack and beef that God himself would not eat if it was set before him." By October 1865, after completing his 3-year term of service, George returned home. However, his injury to the foot had lasting effects, leaving him unable to walk properly. Tragically, little more is known about his life after the war, except that in 1869, his mother began receiving an $8 per month pension due to George's death at the age of 21. These stories are a poignant reminder of how young lives were altered by the war, showing both the bravery and the toll it took on ordinary people. Born to Run. The 16th Connecticut Volunteer Infantry may have been one of the most unfortunate Union regiments during the Civil War. Barely a month after its formation, the regiment found itself thrust into battle at Antietam on September 17, 1862. This battle became the deadliest single-day confrontation in U.S. history, with roughly 23,000 soldiers from both sides either killed, wounded, or missing. The Union Army suffered a staggering 25% casualty rate, while the Confederate Army endured even heavier losses, with 31% of its troops affected. With little training and having loaded their muskets for the first time just a day before the battle, the 16th Connecticut faced catastrophic losses. More than half of the regiment, 52%, became casualties, some of them deserting. Lieutenant Bernard Blakesley described the chaos in vivid terms, recalling that hundreds of cannon were aimed at us, grape shot in canister, marbles and railroad iron were showered down like rain. A battery was sent into action, but it was quickly overwhelmed, losing all of its officers, 7 men, and 5 horses within 5 minutes. Blakesley noted that watching the men stand and be shot down before being ordered to retreat was a horrifying experience. Among those who deserted during the battle was 18-year-old Dixon Tucker, who fled to England. Tucker, the son of a prominent minister, spent the rest of his life in England, where he passed away in 1893. He only visited the United States a couple of times. His British descendants believe that he chose exile over returning to the U.S. due to the shame he brought upon his family. Tucker's maternal grandfather, Nathan Fellows Dixon, had been the first senator from Rhode Island, and other family members were involved in public service. While the exact reason for his desertion remains unclear, it is known that he preferred living in exile rather than accepting amnesty. Tucker settled in Birkenhead, England, where he worked as a clerk in a shipyard. In 1873, he married Agnes Lawson Finley, and they had 9 children. It wasn't until decades later that his great-grandson, Bob Ballin of Surrey, England, discovered the connection to his American family while researching his ancestry. Had Tucker stayed with the 16th Connecticut, his fate might have been very different. In 1864, nearly the entire regiment was captured in Plymouth, North Carolina, and sent to the notorious Andersonville prison in Georgia, where conditions were horrific. Approximately 1/3 of those who were imprisoned there did not survive. Man of the hour. For years, Abraham Lincoln unknowingly carried a hidden message about the Civil War. He never met the person who placed it there. Despite his often unkempt appearance, Lincoln owned a prized possession typical of the time, a gold pocket watch. On April 13, 1861, his watch was sent for repairs to M.W. Galton Company, jewelers in Washington, D.C. It was there that Jonathan Dillon, the jeweler working on the watch, learned that Confederate soldiers had fired on Fort Sumter the day before. The Civil War had officially begun. In the early 1900s, Dillon shared his story with the New York Times about what he had done to Lincoln's watch. He explained, "I was in the act of screwing on the dial when Mr. Galt announced the news." In response, Dillon removed the dial and, using a sharp tool, carved a message into the metal underneath. "The first gun is fired. Slavery is dead. Thank God we have a president who at least will try." It wasn't until 2009 that Dillon's claim could be confirmed. His great-great-grandson, Douglas Stiles, reached out to a curator at the Smithsonian National Museum of American History, where the watch was kept. After some persuasion, a jeweler carefully opened the timepiece. With photographers present, Stiles read aloud the engraving. Jonathan Dillon, April 13, 1861. Fort Sumter was attacked by the rebels on the above date. J. Dillon, April 13, 1861. Washington, thank God we have a government. Jonth Dillon. While Dillon's message was indeed inside, it seemed his recollection was slightly off. Other unexpected markings were also found. Next to Dillon's engraving, someone else had etched, "Le Groff, September 1864, Wash, D.C." The identity of this person remains a mystery, and it's possible that a Confederate sympathizer had also worked on the watch. Additionally, the name Jeff Davis was carved into a brass lever, potentially linking it to the Confederate president. The watch wasn't the only place where secret messages were hidden during the Civil War. According to the Museum of the Confederacy, a Virginia woman shared a story in 2009 about a Confederate soldier and her family who smuggled messages using a brass acorn. Although she showed museum officials the acorn, she declined to donate it. Family stories suggested that the brass acorn was used to carry secret messages tucked away in the soldier's caboose until it reached its destination. That smell. While a picture may be worth 1,000 words, it can never truly capture the full extent of the horrors of war. The air in battle zones was often thick with the stench of sulfur from gunpowder explosions, filling the surroundings with the nauseating scent of something like decaying eggs. But even more disturbing was the overwhelming odor of death. Cornelia Hancock, a 23-year-old nurse from Gettysburg, described this experience to her family in a letter. She recalled, "A sickening, overpowering, awful stench announced the presence of the unburied dead, upon which the July sun was mercilessly shining. With every step, the air grew heavier and fouler until it seemed to possess a palpable, horrible density that could be seen, felt, and even cut with a knife." For Hancock, it wasn't just the sight of the dead, their bodies bloated and disfigured. That was most disturbing. It was the suffocating, nauseating atmosphere that surrounded them. She believed that this toxic air posed as much of a threat to the wounded soldiers as the corpses did, draining the battlefield of its dignity and leaving those who survived with even less hope of recovery. Interestingly, modern military forces seem to agree with Hancock's observations. The U.S. Marines and Army now simulate battle environments that incorporate odors like decaying flesh and burning plastic. This helped prepare soldiers for the overwhelming smells they might encounter, preventing them from being distracted or repulsed in critical situations. Additionally, military training teaches soldiers to recognize specific odors as signals of potential danger. For instance, the smell of cigarette smoke near an abandoned building could indicate the presence of enemies hidden within. This emphasis on smell as both a survival tool and a challenge highlights how sensory experiences, often overlooked, can be as vital to war readiness as physical training. Home, sweet home! By the time the Civil War began, John Howard Payne had been deceased for nearly a decade. However, his legacy may have offered more comfort to ordinary Americans during the conflict than any living person could. In 1822, Payne penned the song "Home, Sweet Home" as the emotional centerpiece of his operetta Clary. The song quickly became a hit, resonating with its heartfelt depiction of the warmth and security of family life in a modest home. Despite its immense popularity, Payne saw very little financial reward from the song due to weak copyright laws at the time. A poor money manager, Payne struggled with financial difficulties throughout his life, passing away in 1852. Home, Sweet Home experienced a resurgence in popularity as the Civil War unfolded. Both Union and Confederate Army bands played it, and according to folk musician Tom Jolin, soldiers would often perform the tune on their harmonicas by campfires. Many stories circulate of soldiers from opposing sides joining together to sing it, either before or after clashes. For Abraham and Mary Todd Lincoln, the song became a rare source of solace following the death of their 12-year-old son, Willie. The song's emotional pull was so strong that Union officials even prohibited regimental bands from performing Home, Sweet Home during the war, fearing it would make soldiers too nostalgic and reluctant to fight. Its influence endured beyond the Civil War. Decades later, during the Spanish-American War, some soldiers reportedly attempted to jump from ships after hearing jazz legend Buddy Bolden play the song on the dock, highlighting the lasting emotional impact of Payne's composition. Heaven Must Be Missing an Angel. In 1850, when 11-year-old Barbara Dosh and her siblings lost both parents, the Sisters of Charity of Nazareth in Louisville, Kentucky, stepped forward to care for them. Barbara grew very fond of the nuns, who were known for their charitable work in the community. After finishing her education at St. Vincent's Academy, where she majored in music, Barbara decided to combine her passion for music with her devotion to God. She joined the Sisters of Nazareth and became Sister Mary Lucy Dosh. In 1861, she traveled to Paducah, Kentucky, to teach music at St. Mary's Academy. However, the outbreak of the Civil War altered her plans. Though most of Paducah supported the South, two Union regiments took control of the town in September 1861. As the war progressed, many soldiers fell ill with diseases such as dysentery, malaria, and yellow fever. Churches in the area, including the Paducah Baptist Church, were converted into hospitals. With a shortage of medical staff, Sister Mary Lucy left her teaching position to assist in caring for the sick and wounded. At just 22 years old, she devoted herself to nursing soldiers from both the Union and Confederate sides who had been injured during the Battle of Belmont, Missouri. With a gentle voice, Sister Mary Lucy comforted her patients, singing to them softly to remind them of their families back home. In an effort to ensure there was enough food for the sick, she ate very little herself, which eventually weakened her health. One day when she failed to show up for work, her patients grew anxious. They wondered what had happened to their angel of mercy. Sadly, Sister Mary Lucy had contracted typhoid fever during an epidemic. She passed away on December 29, 1861. The soldiers who had been cared for by the young nun were heartbroken by her death. To honor her, a military funeral was held at the church. Both Union and Confederate officers, including some prisoners of war, took part in the ceremony, carrying her coffin to the gunboat Peacock. Under a flag of truce, the boat sailed to Union County, Kentucky, where she was buried in the cemetery at St. Vincent's Academy. In a final act of respect, the Northern officers released the Southern officers, allowing them to return to their respective sides. For that one day, the Civil War was paused in part of Kentucky as a tribute to the selfless sacrifice of Sister Mary Lucy, the end of innocence. William Hobson, originally from Vermont, moved to Macon, Georgia, in 1855 at the age of 19 to pursue a career as a cotton merchant. When Georgia seceded from the Union in early 1861, William's dedication to his adopted state was unwavering. He was as passionate about defending Georgia as any native-born Georgian. In a letter to his sister back in Vermont, he referred to any man who abandoned the Confederacy as a dastardly coward. Shortly after the war began, William enlisted in the Confederate Army on his 25th birthday, just 8 days into the conflict. Although details of his military service are scarce, he was wounded during the Battle of Boydton Plank Road, also known as the Battle of Burgess Mill, in Virginia in late 1864. This battle occurred when Union forces attempted to capture the Southside Railroad, the last major supply line for Confederate forces defending Petersburg, Virginia. Due to his injuries, William was sent back home to Georgia on furlough, where he remained until the war ended in 1865. The war also brought personal tragedy to William. His younger brother, Edward, who had fought for the Union Army, was killed in the Battle of Cedar Creek in Virginia, just days before William's own injury. Another brother, George, later retrieved Edward's body and had it reburied in Vermont. These losses left William deeply affected by the war's toll on both his family and the land itself. In December 1865, nearly 8 months after the war's conclusion, William wrote to his sister about the haunting memories that continued to trouble him. He described how the landscape had been ravaged by the horrors of war, with nature itself appearing to silently protest the violence. He recalled the long months of grueling battles, with the same ground repeatedly ravaged by conflict. The forests were burned and every trace of greenery was destroyed, leaving only desolation behind. The world of his youth seemed gone forever, replaced by a chaotic, ruined landscape, filled with the sounds of destruction and suffering. William closed his letter with a somber reflection. A strange, wild experience. Heaven grant it may be the last. Tragically for William, it was. At the age of 37, he died unexpectedly in New York from inflammation of the brain and bowels. His life cut short by the lingering effects of the war and its aftermath. Can this be real? Mary Henry, the 30-year-old daughter of the Secretary of the Smithsonian Institution, meticulously documented her life in Washington, D.C. during the Civil War. Her diary is filled with detailed accounts of daily events, from observing troop movements to volunteering in hospitals, and even socializing with generals who shared firsthand experiences of the battles. On July 10, 1864, following church services, Mary learned of the South's attempted advance on Washington. Although she had been told that as many as 50,000 Confederate soldiers were marching toward the city, the actual number was closer to 14,000. The Confederate Army, in a desperate attempt to salvage their position, was making one final effort. The Confederate commander, Jubal Early, aimed to capture Washington, its resources, and, if possible, its president. Such a victory could have shifted the outcome of the upcoming 1864 presidential election in favor of George McClellan, who was more willing to negotiate with the Confederacy, unlike President Abraham Lincoln, who remained steadfast in his refusal to do so. However, the Confederates were too exhausted to mount a successful assault. Although they came close, the Union successfully repelled them, ensuring the city's safety. On July 13th, Mary and her family ventured out to assess the aftermath in the surrounding areas. Her diary entries provide valuable insights into the hardships faced by civilians during the war. In one entry, Mary describes the plight of a woman whose husband was away fighting for the Union. Confederate soldiers had invaded her home, destroying her clothing in retaliation for actions her husband may have taken in the South. They also stole her food, leaving her children with nothing to eat, and even threatened to burn down her house. As Mary and her family observed, many people were left standing in front of their charred homes, victims of the conflict. But the dangers of wartime extended beyond Confederate forces. One woman told Mary a disturbing story of a Union soldier who requested kerosene oil, a wick, and cotton cloth. When asked what he intended to do with the items, he coldly replied that he planned to burn her house down. Despite her efforts to salvage her belongings, the house was destroyed in the fire, leaving her with almost nothing. Through Mary's diary, we gain a powerful glimpse into the vulnerability and fear that civilians endured during the Civil War, as well as the unpredictable dangers they faced from both sides of the conflict. The gambler. Robert Webster was one of the wealthiest individuals in Atlanta during the Civil War, despite the fact that he was enslaved. His master, Benjamin Yancey, lost all his wealth after the war, but Webster extended him a loan to help restore his credit in business, offering additional financial support if needed. Born in the 1820 at the National Hotel in Washington, D.C., Webster claimed that his father was Daniel Webster, a prominent senator from Massachusetts. However, Webster was sold to a plantation owner in South Carolina when he was in his 20s. There, he crossed paths with Benjamin Yancey, a successful lawyer and planter who was immediately impressed by Webster's intelligence, honesty, and kind nature. Over time, Webster persuaded Yancey to purchase both him and his wife. When Yancey was appointed as a diplomat to Argentina, he gave Webster a barbershop in Atlanta, requiring only a monthly rent payment. Webster quickly expanded his business, opening a second shop and employing 7 staff members. However, his significant wealth came from his role as a loan shark, lending money to gamblers who frequented the card games held at his barbershop. When Yancey returned from Argentina, he settled in Atlanta, which had grown into a booming and chaotic city during the Civil War. Webster saw an opportunity in the constant flow of refugees and soldiers, using his resources to speculate in gold and currency. He then traded those assets for goods, further increasing his wealth. At times, Webster put himself at great risk to assist Union soldiers. One of his most courageous actions involved organizing other enslaved people to transport hundreds of severely injured Union soldiers from the battlefield to a hospital where their lives were saved. However, when Atlanta fell to Union forces, the soldiers raided Webster's stash of goods to support their efforts. While they took a significant amount, Webster managed to hide a portion of his wealth. After the war, Webster initially continued to thrive, but eventually succumbed to alcoholism. As his businesses failed, he reached out to Yancey for help in 1880. In return for the financial support Webster had given him earlier, Yancey assisted Webster and his family, providing for them until his death in 1883. Even after Webster passed away, Yancey continued to care for his widow and daughter, demonstrating the lasting bond between the two men. Anxiety's moment. In the mid-1800s, Isaac Leeser published The Occident, a monthly journal that supported the traditional practices of the Jewish faith. While not an officially ordained rabbi, Leeser took on a role similar to that of a chazan, a lay leader, in his congregation in Philadelphia, where he would preach to the community. Approximately a month after the start of the Civil War, Leeser received a letter from one of his Occident subscribers, referred to only as RAL. This subscriber proposed an unconventional idea to end the conflict. RAL suggested that Leeser write to President Lincoln and urge him to use his influence to put a stop to the war. The letter proposed a creative solution, suggesting that instead of a prolonged war, a champion be chosen from each side to engage in a contest, with the outcome determining the winner. ERAL argued that this would be a far more humane way of resolving the conflict, as it would save the lives of countless soldiers by sacrificing only a few individuals in the name of the country's cause. Despite the suggestion, Leeser chose to remain neutral during the Civil War and did not act on RAL's proposal. His decision reflects the complexities faced by Jewish leaders during a time of national division, as well as the often difficult position religious figures occupied in the context of the Civil War. While the letter's idea may seem far-fetched, it highlights the deep desire for peace and the extreme lengths to which some individuals were willing to go in the hopes of avoiding the immense bloodshed of war. As we've seen, the stories of ordinary people during the Civil War are often just as compelling as those of the famous generals and politicians who shaped history. From courageous individuals risking everything to help others, to unexpected heroes making a stand against the odds, these tales offer a glimpse into the resilience and determination of the human spirit during one of America's most turbulent times. If you enjoyed learning about these fascinating figures and their untold stories, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more captivating insights into the Civil War and the broader history of the American Old West. Don't miss out on new videos, updates, and more incredible stories from history.